Hey folks, Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and I am doing yet another one of these um, reader submitted or community submitted freelancer Q&As live stream. So recording in our community, and then I will export the results to YouTube where it will also be available. Theoretically, I will most likely do that. So anyway, this week's question is kind of an interesting one. Is it normal to feel guilty when raising your rates as a freelancer is the elided implication? So you're out there freelancing and you're charging, $90 an hour and you decide to charge $100 an hour or something like that. And if you're doing that, I guess the question is it normal to feel guilty? Um, and then, maybe by implication, like, do I think you should feel guilty about that? And my answer here is going to be a lot more nuanced than people might think if they know me. But so as for whether it's normal or not, I don't really know. I haven't done a poll on this subject. I imagine it's common, but like probably whether that's normal or whether that's something you might expect to feel will depend a lot on your personality. If you're a very I drive a hard bargain type of person, you probably won't feel guilty. If you are kind of more of a facilitator and a pleaser, you might feel guilty, especially if customers get upset or it puts them in a pinch. So it's hard to speak to normal whether or not you will feel guilty. Probably depends on you. But I guess the question is, should you feel guilty? And this is where my take gets a little bit more nuanced. And my answer to this is yes, sometimes you probably should feel guilty. Now, let me kind of walk through the scenarios here that I'm envisioning when I think one maybe ought to feel guilty. There is, and for the sake of YouTube, if I remember, I will add a call out to that, but a video I've done in the past, and I have talked a lot in the past about this idea of tying up your hourly rate, or I guess your salary if you're a salaried employee, with worth. So if you make $100,000 a year, I think that particular inflection point for a lot of people is a big deal. I am a six-figure earner. So this isn't like an amount of money that happens to flow its way into my bank account every year. This is a matter of identity. I am a six-figure earner. So and this is just a construct of society, and I'm not trying to like claim that I'm some kind of monk or whatever, like that money doesn't matter at all to me, but it's more that understand that there is this dynamic in general where your salary takes on a piece of identity and you identify that way, and then you go out and compare yourself to other people. So if you make that $100,000 a year, then you're talking to somebody who only makes, I guess, $90,000 a year. Only one of you is a six-figure earner. So that creeps its way into the freelancing conversation when people talk about their rates. So when you get into communities of freelancers, a lot of times you will, have people saying like, well, my rate is 60 an hour, my rate is 80 an hour, or whatever the case may be. This leads to a lot of posturing, and it leads to games of chicken with clients. So if you are in a community where you, announce that you have been charging $60 an hour and everyone around you scoffs at that and says like, oh, I wouldn't do any work for less than 80. And that kind of becomes the norm of this community that you're in. What are you going to do? Well, probably on your next Upwork bid or whatever, you're going to nudge your rate on up to 80 so that you fit in, and, probably give yourself a big pep talk about how you're worth it or something. And then you go and you raise your rates in this fashion. In this case, if you are doing this to existing clients, I personally think you ought to feel a little bit guilty about that. And here's the reason. Your hourly rate or your salary is an utterly arbitrary figure that is divorced of any real concept other than like a heavily curated sense of the going market value for commodity labor. Meaning, if you are a Ruby on Rails developer, you maybe make somewhere between 100,000 and 130,000 per year. And it's not because you're worth anything. It's because that the market is loosely settled on that as the acceptable range to pay Ruby on Rails developers. So that's fine for hiring. When you go off on your own and you're doing freelance work and you come and you say, I am going to do this type of work at, let's call it $100 an hour. You are doing the same thing. You are falling into like the range of acceptable pay for a Ruby on Rails developer on Upwork in a given place. And then your customers come and they hire you as somewhat of a commodity. You fall within the acceptable range of their budget and what they expect to pay. So you both agree on an arrangement where you're doing custom work for them for $100 an hour. Now, fast forward 6 months or something where you've been doing work with them, and you were in your freelancer forum, and everybody was out, peeing and measuring how far it went, and everybody convinces you that you're worth 120 an hour. So let me ask you this. Has the deliverable you're doing changed from yesterday to today when you raise your rates? Probably not. Is the quality of your work notably improved? No. Are you doing more work somehow? Is anything about the experience of working with you improving as far as the client is concerned? Nope. You're just going to them and demanding more money because, I don't know, a community of freelancers told you to. That is not a good experience for a customer. So I would feel a little bit guilty about that. You are in effect saying, what you'll go and do is say that you're worth it or something, but that's really arbitrary. It's just a number you pull out of nowhere, and you're adjusting because a bunch of other people exerted some form of peer pressure on you. So you were going to the client and saying, hey, guess what? For no particular benefit to you, I'm going to charge you more money. And I'm relying on the fact that you're going to say yes because I have some leverage here. You're probably going to take it on the chin for a while and just accept this because the alternative is you lose a worker. And I don't think that's great. I don't think it's the end of the world. You've got to earn a living. If you're struggling to pay your mortgage or what have you, then, whatever. Likewise, if you've been doing work for this client for like 2 years and never raised your rates, they should expect that, even if it's not necessarily specifically economically justifiable. So it's a nuanced thing, and I wouldn't feel overly guilty about it, but understand this for exactly what it is. If you are raising your rates in this scenario, you are going to a partner of yours that you're doing business with that has given you money in the past and saying, for no additional value, I want more money from you. And, basically the leverage I have here is that I am daring you to go solve this work problem in some other way. You are demanding something in exchange for nothing. And I personally, in as much as I'm ever in a situation like that, I don't really love the idea of that situation. I'd feel a little bit bad. It's kind of like begging, I guess, or asking for favors. So I am admittedly on a bit of a soapbox here, but I really don't like that scenario for raising your rates. Now, let's look at a subtly different scenario. Let's say that you are that same Rails developer charging $100 an hour, and you can juggle a client or two at a time with the custom work you're doing for them. Now you've got 2 clients in the mix at $100 an hour, and a third one comes along and really likes the cut of your jib and wants to work with you. So you talk to them and you say, hey, I'm really busy right now. I can't really take on new business. I am full. And they come along and say, well, what if I paid you $120 an hour instead of $100 an hour you're getting? I have a lot less of a problem with this, assuming you do right by your existing clients and give them some notice so they can make other arrangements. This is an issue of supply and demand. So the demand for your work outstrips the supply of your work. And a rational thing to do in that situation is differentiate based on raising your prices. So you have 3 bidders for your work. You just take the 2 that will bid the most. And that's a very reasonable thing. It's also understandable. If you went to one of your clients and said, hey, I was just talking to somebody and they want me to take on this custom project and the pay rate is higher. So unless you want to match it, I am going to do that. I'll give you a month of notice to tie up loose ends. I'll help you find someone to backfill, et cetera. You're giving them a chance to meet the rate or what have you. You're doing right by everybody involved. Go for it. Don't feel guilty about that in the slightest. And then the I guess most ideal circumstance under which to raise a rate, in my opinion, is where you're actually doing something more for the customer. So in theory, I guess if you're an hourly laborer, like you're writing code for them and you gradually get better at writing code over the course of time, then you could say you're providing more value. I don't really like that because hourly in any business context is sort of a set of perverse incentives. So if you're raising your rate because you're getting more efficient, you're not actually delivering any value. You're just saying like, well, it used to take me this amount of time to get, $1,000 worth of work done. So I charge $100 an hour. And I'm doing this amount of work in 10 hours, so that's $1,000. Well, now I can do all that work in 8 hours, so I'm raising my rate to $125 an hour. It's a net neutral for the customer if you're truly getting better. You're just raising your rates, spending few hours, and in the end, it's a wash. But it's probably not actually working out that way. You're probably not really all that much more efficient if you're billing by the hour. Now let's switch this around and say you're quoting things out by the project or something. So you're doing website builds as a Rails developer, not selling people Rails labor. if you are building websites, for a certain kind of business and you're charging $10,000 per website build, um, and you've done a few websites for a customer, now let's say that you want to increase the amount of money that you charge for these website builds. So you want to go from $10,000 a build to $15,000 a build. Well, if you throw in additional deliverables or additional value of some kind as you're changing that price, that flat price, then absolutely go for it. So if you can really construct a good narrative as to why you're charging more, that's really the best case scenario. The other way to have, a reasonable narrative about charging more in a situation like that would be if your costs were increasing. So, inflation's happening. Maybe you're working with subcontractors and they're all charging you more money. Maybe the price of whatever framework you're using to build out the websites goes up. That's another perfectly reasonable reason to raise your rate. I feel like I could have come up with a less alliterative sentence. I feel like I'm dizzy. Sorry about that. But I guess to tie all that up, think about this from the customer's perspective. And I'll let this feed into kind of what I want to talk about next, which is mitigating feelings of guilt in this situation. But imagine that you're the customer and you're working with somebody in some capacity. Say you're working with an hourly laborer of some kind. Imagine, think of it this way. Say you pay somebody every 2 weeks to come over and clean your house and they charge you $200. And then one day they show up and they're like, I'm now charging you $250 for this. Are you going to fire them or tell them to go away? Probably not. Are you going to pay them somewhat grudgingly? Yeah, maybe you negotiate with them. I don't know. But how would you feel as in this situation if when you're like, okay, why are you raising your rates? And they say, I'm worth it. Are you going to clean more things? Or are you going to clean them better? Are you going to use better materials? Nah, I'm just going to charge you more. That's not a great experience. Now imagine if they came to you and said, well, I'm going to charge you more. And here's the thing, the cost of cleaning supplies has really gone up over the last couple of years. I've held your rate steady up to this point, but I just can't do it anymore. Now you're probably feeling a little bit better about this. Now imagine if instead of that, they said, hey, I'm raising your rates. And the reason I'm doing that is now I'm using this whole other kind of material that disinfects, and it actually fights mildew and other unsightly stains. So I get it if you don't want to pay this extra. It's not really negotiable, but you're getting a lot more value out of it. So now you're not going to see unsightly stains on tile in your kitchen and your bathroom. It's really good and really preventative for that. Now you're probably feeling best about this of all. Yeah, you're paying more, but you're getting more for it. And that can be, the hardest thing of all to argue with or find fault with as the buyer. And I think how you feel vis-a-vis your customer is really, or how that customer feels vis-a-vis you and the business you're doing is the most important thing and should inform how guilty or not guilty you feel about something like raising your rates. If you think of the scenario of the peeing match among a group of freelancers and then them coming and puffing out their chest and telling you, I'm worth it, so I demand more money, that's not a good customer experience. It's kind of absurd. If they're talking about raising the rates because their cost has increased, you'd be sympathetic to that. They're talking about raising the rates because you are going to get an outsized amount of benefit for that increase. Yeah, now you're onto something. So in terms of mitigating those feelings of guilt, if you're prone to them, that's why that narrative is super important. My costs have gone up. I'm delivering more value. I'm thinking of retiring, but I'll keep you engaged as a customer. You're just going to have to make it worth my while, and I'm sorry. So that narrative of some kind that you are bringing to the customer is going to help you feel less guilty if you can articulate the reason behind it and make it one where it's really hard for them to argue with. Kind of switching a little bit in terms of mitigating the tendency to feel guilty. If you're doing B2B work, which just about everybody watching this almost certainly is, you're not putting anyone out on the street. You're not raising the rent on some family barely making ends meet. You are, selling app dev services. So if you increase your rate for that, even if they say no, they can't afford it, or if they grudgingly pay it while mumbling about how they're going to go out of business or something, people will be fine. You're not breaking anyone's life here. And then finally, if I'm going to, tap into a sense of entitlement that you might have in one way or another, it's that you don't owe anyone any labor. So even if you are a puffed up, peeing match person coming out and saying, I don't want to do work for less than 80 an hour because my vanity just can't handle it, I wouldn't like coming to somebody with that explanation personally, but You don't owe anybody work at $60 an hour. So if that's really the tack you want to take, you don't have to feel guilty about it. You do not owe anyone labor or services under any circumstances, unless, in my mind, you've agreed to them contractually or otherwise. I would not feel good about telling somebody you're going to do work for them for the next quarter at $60 an hour and then deciding halfway through that you're worth more. But if you're not going back on anything you've agreed to, then you really don't owe anyone anything. So, that's kind of mindset stuff for mitigating the feelings of guilt. I would say there's also actions you can take. And this is another one. If I can find the video, I'll put it up, where I talked about like how to go about raising prices. If you do it right by your customers, I think you will feel a lot less guilt as well. So there's the mindset of, I don't owe anyone labor. I'm not going to ruin anyone's life. And I've developed a narrative for why I'm doing this. But then there's what you actually do with the customer. So number one, give them plenty of notice. It's not like I'm raising my rate starting tomorrow. It's more like, hey, I have a lot of business coming in. I'm going to raise my rate starting, January 1st of next year. I just wanted to make sure to give you plenty of notice. So that gives them time to adjust to that reality, reconsider their budget, reconsider working with you. Because by the way, if you raise your rates, there is a chance you will lose business. Figure out what they're going to do in response to this new information. So give them some lead time. More is better. In terms of the narrative that you have, give them an honest, credible explanation. So your narrative should be true unless you're a sociopath. I wouldn't make things up. And it should be credible, and you should be able to trace it back to things that are really happening. Like, I have more inbound business and I have to pick and choose. Raising my rates is a good natural way to help me do that. Or I have worked these new pieces of value into my service offering, and I rather focus on this and have this deliverable as my main deliverable. So going forward, this is what I'm delivering. And, if you don't like it, I understand. But this is what I'm doing. So the explanation is honest, credible, ties into what you're actually doing. And that's going to do right by the customer because it gives them all the information they need to make an informed decision. If you're raising your rates because there's just so much more demand for Rails developers, that helps them understand credibly that the value of the market is going up. So it should be informative and help them make a decision. And then I would also tactically say, offer a gentle landing for anybody who can't afford this rate increase. When you are raising your rates, there is a chance that it doesn't make sense, that it places you outside of their budget. It eclipses the value they're getting out of it. There is potential for an off-ramp needed for that customer, and you should offer that to them. The way I've done this when thinking about what to do with messaging and hit subscribe, and what we've all done, I should say, from an account management perspective, is offer a few different off-ramps or just like ways to land after the rate increase. So we would often say, okay, starting January 1st, we're going to be raising our rates. But anything that you commit to right now ahead of time and pay up front will honor the old rate for some amount of time going into the next year. Meaning you can incent a customer to lock in an old rate by prepaying for a fairly big commitment. A lot of customers will like something like that. It gives them a little bit of a grace period to adjust. You could also say, I'm raising my rates, but if you're locked in on budget, here's a budget neutral option. So if you're, I don't know, doing 40 hours a week of work and you want to raise your rates, you could say, if you want, I'll do 35 hours a week at the same flat, monthly price or whatever. So adjusting the scope, you're going to ratchet down scope a little, but keep the price the same. Of course, there is the option to just pay the new rate. And if you do offer those three things, then in addition to not working with you, the customer has three different ways to kind of square the new financial reality. Earn a grace period by pre-committing at your old rate, stay the same budget-wise, but keep going, or just pay the new rate, or, for not work with you. I have never, when providing three options to keep working with you, I have never encountered a customer that made a stink about that. I mean, they might say something like, they might make some noise about like it not being ideal or whatever. They're not always happy about it, but I've never had anyone seriously balk at that. The absolute thing that just about everybody does is pick one of the three options. Occasionally you lose a little business and they say it just doesn't make sense. But at the very least, offering them 3 different ways to accommodate the new reality should alleviate any feelings of guilt you have at all. So circling back, I think it really, like, whether you should, in my opinion, feel guilty or not depends on whether you're just springing some kind of zero sum, like I'm a master negotiator, peeing contest thing on them, because that's just not good customer experience. But if you're not doing that, if you have valid reasons for raising your rate, and if you can articulate those to the customer and you can help walk them through and navigate that decision, you have absolutely nothing to feel guilty about. In fact, over the course of time, as you are learning more and more about how to deliver more and more value in what you do, you should be moving up market. You should be increasing the prices that you command because you're delivering more value. It's a natural thing to do. So hopefully all of that makes sense. And yeah, I will catch all of you next time.